Hi everyone, and welcome to Joomla 3 Day. This is about the fifth in a series of presentations we're having all day long about a variety of Joomla topics. And I've been practicing hard for this one. This topic is talking about native internationalization with Joomla 3, essentially creating multilingual sites with Joomla. And the person who's going to talk with us today is Ron Van Schaik from Anything Digital, who produce other extensions that you may know, such as SH404, SEF, and JCal Pro. That aside, I'm going to hand over to Ron, and he's going to have a particular focus on the mistakes that people make when they build multilingual sites. Easy things that you can learn to avoid that will make your site building process much more successful. So, Ron, I'm going to pass over control to you right now.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. I'll start by just saying thank you to Steve and his crew for putting together a great day of great presentations. And but we're going to move along quite quickly today. It's this multilingual feature of Joomla, especially in Joomla 3, is so important, and it really reflects the community that Joomla is all about. But it's very powerful, and there's a couple of pitfalls that people run into, and I want to just highlight those pitfalls so that you can avoid those and or fix them for other people when they do run into them. So let me go ahead. We're going to do this the dangerous way and do a live setup straight from a standard cloud access demo. So without further ado, we'll get started. There's really 7 basic steps that we need to go through in order to set up multilingual Joomla sites. We're going to go through the steps, understand what each one of them does, and I'll get away from your screen here for a sec so you don't need to see me all the way through. Understand what these functions do and why we need them, identify the common problems that we run into, and if we have time, we'll cover some of the tips on managing translations as well as working on templates. So, step number 1 is not required, but it's something that's going to help you a lot. We're going to set up the multilingual status admin module. To do so, we're simply going to go to extensions. We're going to go to the module manager. Now, this thing that people run into all the time is that they forget to select administrator over here. It's a module that's shown in the back, so we need to select administrator. It is already installed, and we see it right here, and all we need to do is enable it. Pretty simple, nothing that can really go wrong, except sometimes people cannot find it because they don't select the administrator filter. All we've done is created this handy link at the bottom that will keep track of where we're at and what problems may have been presented. So let's see what our multilingual status is at this point after step 1, which is enabling the multilingual status module. As you can see, we've created a site that is not a multilingual site. In step 2, we're going to actually do the step that makes a Joomla site a multilingual site, which is to enable the multilingual plugin. So we're going to look for the language filter plugin, and I make this mistake all the time. I search for it and it is not there because it's not yet, it is installed. So all we need to do is enable this. We can take a look at some of the options in here. We have an option here that's often used. We're only going to cover some of the often used one, which is how the language is selected for new visitors. Is it going to show them the default site language, or is it going to attempt to detect the browser settings as to what language they've selected for their browser? Often people like to use the browser settings so that if I come in with a French browser, it will show me a French site automatically. The second item that's often used is the remove URL language code. When you have your search engine friendly URLs enabled, this will take the language code away from the default language. So if I, for example, set my language to be English, I would have a www.domain.com/en/, for example, as my homepage. If I remove the URL language code, it will just be www.domain.com for my default language. So we're going to enable this. And by enabling this, we should now have a multilingual site. We will cover the language code in a second. And if we look at our status now, we can see that we have a multilingual site, and it's giving us all sorts of information here as to what our problems are so far with the site. We can see we have a nasty red icon here. We have some information notifications up here. The system language code is a code that gets inserted into your page that lets search engines and such know what language we're in. We generally want to enable this, so we'll enable that as well. If we look back on our multilingual status module, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the things that we need to do. Let's concentrate on the second one, which is to install a language switcher module. Now, we do not have any languages installed yet except for our default language that the demo came with. So it's not really going to do anything, but since we're doing modules and plugins, let's go ahead and make that step number 3. We're going to go to modules. Now, I've changed my filter, so I have to change it back to being a site module because this is going to be shown to our visitors, and I'm going to have to create a new module here. It has not yet been installed, which is the language switcher module. And I can name it anything I like any other module. I want to make sure that I select the proper position, which is often forgotten. And of course, I want to make sure that I've assigned it to the proper menus. I'm going to show it on all my pages. We have some options here as well. We have an option to use a drop-down. If I use the drop-down, these no longer are going to be active. Generally speaking, people like to use the little flags and have a horizontal display, so we're going to leave it just like this. If we save and close this, we've now got our module. The thing that generally goes wrong here is, like any other module, people forget to actually associate it with the menus, and people forget to put it in a proper position. If we look at the front of our site now, we didn't have our language chooser, and now miraculously we have created a module on our Joomla site where we can choose the languages that we have enabled, which is none. At this point then, we have a multilingual site that really does not function. So our status at this point has hardly changed, but we've gotten rid of one of the notifications. We're making some progress. And our next thing is to actually install some of the 50 official languages that are supported by Joomla. In the deck, I will have a link to the actual Joomla community page where you can check on how you can contribute to the languages and what languages are available and all that. So, In Joomla 1.5, this was very difficult. In Joomla 1.6, it was very difficult. In Joomla 2.5, I think it was 2.54. Things got much, much easier, and now it's installing languages is very simple. You used to have to find them, download them, figure out where they came from, which ones were right files. We no longer have to do that. We simply go to our language manager and we install the languages that we want. We have an install language button. It lists all the languages that are officially available. Today I'm going to install Dutch because Steve will appreciate that, and he gets on my case all the time about being Dutch. So this is sometimes confusing. If you hit install here, nothing happens. It just takes you to a different tab. Make sure that you hit the little install button. It seems silly, but sometimes people forget to click the right button. And now in the search, Dutch is no longer available because it's already installed. It's a very smart little installer. It's a great new feature in Joomla 3. And we're going to install Canadian French since I'm about 5 minutes from Quebec. And as you can see, there's 2 different French languages, and we'll get to some of the confusion surrounding that as well later on. Okay, this is fantastic. We've managed to install 2 languages. And if we look now on our language manager, you can see that we have Dutch, we have English UK for Steve, and we have French Canadian for my neighbors. And the important thing to note is the language tag. The language tag here is something that often causes a lot of confusion, and we will cover that in the next steps. Now, these packages that we've just installed, they install all the different prompts for the different languages, for the front and the back, and all the core components. So all these items will be translated into the languages if I choose to select those languages when I log into the back. Let's see if we can actually take a look at this. We're going to log out. We now have our option to choose different languages, and we can see that the entire interface will be in Dutch at this point. We'll log out, go back in English, or our default language. But at this point, people get confused because they go and create a new article and want to create an article in Dutch, and when we go to select the languages, they are not yet available. So what we've done is we've created all our prompts for English and for French, Canadian, as well as for Dutch, but we haven't actually activated languages to be used in our content. This is the next step, is to enable the language content. Again, we go to the language manager. Here we find our installed site languages. It's the languages that are installed and as front-end prompts. We have our installed administrator menu and languages, which are the languages that are installed in order to translate everything that you see here in the back. And we have our content languages, which we have not yet set up. So we cannot yet create content in the languages that we have installed. So let's go ahead and create this for our Dutch one. and we can set the native translated language, so it's Nederlands, and there we go. We set the language tag. We set the URL code. If we use, and most of us will, search engine friendly URLs, the language code that we select here is what's entered in the language. So if I set this to NL, when I switch my language to Dutch on the front of the website, my URLs will include NL. So it will be www.domain.com/NL/ whatever the article may be. The image prefix is going to select a little map that we're going to show when we change the languages. We make sure it's published, and we set the access to public. We'll talk about the access a little bit later for our tips. So we're going to save this, and we're going to repeat that process for our Canadian French. Nederland in that's probably wrong. I am actually not a French speaker, and we're going to set a language tag FR-CA, and we're going to set the language code FR, and we have to make sure that we select the FR-CA, so we have a Quebec style flag here. If we just choose the regular FR, we get a French flag. May be appropriate for you, but since we're French Canadian here, we're going to use the Quebec flag. Some of you may have noticed that at this point I've made a mistake, a common mistake that a lot of people make. But again, since we've installed the multilingual status module, we can take a look at this. You can see that we have here a notification for our Dutch language. And if we read our notification up here, it actually tells us exactly what the problem is. It tells us that the content language tag NL doesn't have a site language tag that matches. So we have to make sure and take a look at what this means. Whenever you see this on your site or on your client's site, think right away about going to your content languages and checking the tag. And you can see that this language NL doesn't seem to match this FR and the EN. So let's take a look. We're going to go into our Dutch language, and we're going to correct our tag so that it matches the exact tag that's been used. Oops. We're going to use the exact tag that's been used in the official language when we installed it. So let's save and close that. If you want to cross-reference those, the easy way to do that is to go here, take a look at these language tags, and make sure that this language tag that's in the installed site language matches the language tag that we have entered ourselves in the content language. We go to our multilingual status, and joy, joy, we've made some improvement. Now, we're getting now to a point where we have just a few things left to do. It tells us that the language filter and the language switcher modules may or may not have been published, and there's some issues with the site anyway. And what we have here is that we don't have any default home pages. So step number 5, we have to create our content languages. The thing that we really need to watch out for that's important is that we create the language tags, enter the language tags exactly as they are based on our installed languages. If those two do not match, then you cannot activate those languages on the front end. The flag won't show, and the visitors will not be able to select a language. What we can do, even if it's broken, we're going to break it again for a second. Even if this is broken, my language tag is broken, and again We can verify that it's broken by going to the multilingual status. Go there all the time. It's broken. If we go to create content, then we can see that we create a new piece of content. We can actually select both our Canadian French and our Dutch. If you or your client have gone ahead and created all the content, but the switcher is not working because the language tag is wrong, then you have not wasted any time. All you need to do is correct that language tag, and all those translations will become active on the front end. So let's go ahead and correct our language tag before we move on. Content. We'll go to our Dutch language. And we'll fix that tag. Okay, the next thing that we need to do, in order for a language to be displayed on the front end, we need to have a home page for each and every language. And to create a home page, we need to create some sort of menu item that has that language selected and is set to be the default for that language. Now, every single menu is allowed to have only one default. If we look at the current main menu, we have one home item that is set to be the default page for the language all. And the language all is actually something important that needs to be activated, and we'll discuss this in a little bit more, what the implications of having this language is. That needs to be activated in order for you to have a fully translatable site. So what we're going to do first, in step number 6, is to create our main menu for each and every language. So we're just going to add a new menu, and we're going to call it our Dutch main menu. So we have one place where we can put our default Dutch menu item. Then we're going to create another one for our French Canadian menu. We'll call it main, French Canadian main menu. And finally, we're going to also create one for that mysterious all language. And we'll call it the all main menu. It is actually something that once we've translated our site, nobody will see, but it's something that's required in order for the Joomla multilingual system to work appropriately. You'll see we have not yet gotten modules attached to this. We're going to do that during the translation. I create an all main menu item because one of the things that's going to save you a lot of time is by keeping your current main menu, especially if you have a site that's already been created, that's already got a lot of content in it, keep your current main menu and turn that into your default language menu. So the all menu, main menu, will just have one single item in it once we're done, and everything that's in the main menu will become our default language menu items. So the important thing to remember is that even though it's not really a language that you have installed, is that you also need a main menu for your all languages. Our final step that's required in order for, we see that we now have not really changed the status here at all. In our final step, we're going to create these home pages. So simply, we're going to go to each menu and add a new menu item. Since we do not have any Dutch, we'll call this our we'll call it our Dutch home, just to make it easy. And we're going to select a type of menu item that does not require us to actually have content yet, because we have to create the menu item before we can create any of the translated content. So let's go ahead. The featured articles menu item type is an easy one to use. It's one that people often use anyway, and that does not require us to have content that's already translated. Our next thing to do is to ensure that we've set this to the correct language. So this is our Dutch home. We want to select the Dutch language, and we need to set this as the default page for the Dutch language. So it's our default Dutch home page. If I enter the site now and my browser is set to Dutch, then the language filter will detect that language and show me this page as the default page if I go to the main domain, www.domain.com. We can close this, and if we take a look at our menu now, we see we have a little Dutch flag on our Dutch main menu. So we're going to do the same for our French-Canadian menu. We'll call it our French-Canadian home. We might want to translate this later to a proper home. Once your translators get into this, again, we're going to select the featured articles. It's only going to show the ones that are in French anyway because of the language filter. We're going to make sure that it's set to Canadian French, and we're going to make sure it's set to default page. Once we close that, we're going to take a look at our menu, and we have the Quebec flag. The next step we're going to take, we're going to go to our main menu where our existing home item is, and we're going to change this to English. You may already have set up your site and have all sorts of stuff in here, and you already have on your home page all kinds of modules assigned based on it, etc., etc. So if you change this from being the all languages home to being the default languages home or the English home, then you do not have to go back and reassign all the modules, etc., that you may already have assigned. Simply go in, change this to the English home page, leave it as default. When we save this, we'll see that now that no longer, oops, and we have to go and create our other page first. Sorry, that's one mistake that a lot of people make, and I still make. So let's go back to our menu. We're going to go to our all main menu. We're going to create our new menu item here first. There you get to see another live demonstration of what can go wrong. We're going to create a home all item. It really doesn't matter what it is, but we're going to select again the featured article, set it as all, set it as the default home page, so that will take over from the other item that was the default home page. You'll see now that the home icon is now on this menu. We're going to go to the main menu and change this item to be our English home page. It will no longer be set as a default page because the new item that we created has become the home page. We're going to set this to English, set it to default, save and close. we'll take a look at our menu, and we can now see we have our little British flag, the UK flag, the Dutch flag, the Quebec flag, and we have our home icon for our all home. If we look at our multilingual status, we now see green check marks everywhere and no notifications, which probably means that we're all set. We have a fully configured multilingual site. If we refresh our page here, we should have all our flags. Now, that really is all that it takes to set up your multilingual site. So there are 7 steps. Let's take a look here for a second. We'll bring over our slide. We have 7 steps. We've got the first, we published a multilingual status admin module. Second, we published the language filter plugin. Third, we published the language switcher module. Then we install additional languages, activate languages, create menus for each language, including all, and then create a home or default item for each language, including all. But we actually haven't translated anything yet. I think I got about 5 or 10 minutes left, so I'll start wrapping things up quickly. But we can now go ahead and create some content. So let's take a look here and at the way that we want to move ahead here. Generally speaking, we want to, I'll bring this slide back in real quick. We want to start by translating the existing menu modules. So we're going to create the modules, then we're going to translate the categories, then the articles, then the menu items, then the modules, which is basically the way that you would build your site anyway, even if whether it's multilingual or not. So you've already built your site, and you're going to repeat this process for your new languages. So let's go ahead first and go to our module manager. We're going to find our menu, our main menu, which is our all main menu. And we're going to turn that into our English main menu. Let's go back and take a look here. Let's keep that as all and create a new copy. What I want to do is create an English main menu, and I'm going to switch this to English UK. And I want to select my English menu for this that I've created, which is my main menu. And I'm going to save that as a copy. So if I go back to our modules, then I can see that I now have an English main menu and a main menu. And we're going to make sure that our main menu here is set to all. And we select our main menu here as all main menu. So now we've basically switched our main menu to become an English one. We'll quickly do one for the Dutch language as well. So I'm just going to take my English one, and I'm going to have to make another copy. Our Dutch main menu, I'm going to switch this to my Dutch main menu that I've created. So for the module, and change this to the Dutch language. And we're going to save and close that. If we now go to the front, and we switch to Dutch, we see that we now have Dutch home, and we still have a home all, and we just don't need that anymore, so we're going to change that as well. But we have our Dutch home now set up, so we're all good to go. And now we can translate some content. And we basically do the same thing. We're going to take this and we're going to turn that into our English content and save it. And then we're going to translate this. So, het is zo makkelijk. And set this to Dutch. We'll call it Getting Started Dutch. And save that as a copy. Remember to save it as a copy so you don't overwrite it. And if we go to our Dutch home now, make sure it's published. We have a Dutch item here. Okay, so let's make it featured so that it'll show on the home page. And we are ready to go. Let's go to our Dutch home. And we have our Dutch content here now. Okay, finally, let's take a look at some additional things. It's rather complicated to get all these things translated. There are some options, and we have one at anything digital that we create, which is where we get we'll install it from the web. We have the Josetta Translation Manager, which goes on top now that we've now that we have a fully translatable site. We can install a translation manager to make it easier for your translators to be able to translate your site. The Joomla, the Josetta allows you to create content easily without needing to know any of the important things that we just did. Josetta allows you to go ahead and take any piece of content and translate it, say the French, without needing to know any of what Joomla does. It creates all your associations and does everything that it needs to do, and your translator doesn't need to log into the back office. Anyway, I think we're running pretty tight here, so let's think about wrapping things up. I'll see if Steve has gotten any questions from you, and we will move ahead and just wrap things up. In the slideshow that we'll post, you will get a lot of additional information, your resources where you can find all the data, some translation notes, some things. I'll just show the deck here for a second. Some items that you want to keep track of, that when you convert a standard site to a multilingual site, to change your all languages to the default languages. Keep in mind that all means that I want an item to be visible at all time, but I don't want you to translate it. So anything that needs to be translated needs to be changed from all to the default language. In many cases, there's additional languages such as French Canadian, French, which you'll want to go in and change your URLs to reflect that. In Joomla 3's ACL can be used in order to keep a language hidden until you have finished translating it. You can use a translation manager such as Josetta to simplify the management of your translations. You can, and there's a professional version as well as a free version. The professional version lets you use the ACL to assign languages to different users and use Bing translation, machine language. You can read a book like Steve Birch's Joomla 3 Explained, and I urge you to be part of the community, participate online, and attend any events that are in your community if possible. I think I'll pass this on to Steve and see if he's got any questions or if you've had any questions. I hope it wasn't too fast for you, but everything will be in the deck and you'll be able to review everything through there.
Wonderful. Thanks indeed, Ron.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Do we have any questions from the audience at all?
I'm not sure if I see those, Steve. So we'll assume it no, and I'll review a few items. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple. I'm just going to ask for more explanation quickly.
Okay. The presenter info. So my name is Ron Van Schaik. I work at Anything Digital. We are the creators of things such as SH447 and Watchful as well, and Josetta, the translation manager, which is a translation manager for the core language that's available in Joomla. One of the reasons we created that was that it is exactly that. It just manages core functionality. Actually, if you install Josetta and use it to manage it, you could actually uninstall it and your site continues to work normally. So it actually just adds to the core languages. It doesn't replace anything. So Beth, yeah, Ron Van Schaik, Anything Digital, Twitter is probably quick and easy at Ron_V_S.
Okay, a couple of questions. Will it work with K2, or does it have to be the Joomla core only?
Josetta, K2 is fully compatible with the core Joomla languages, and Josetta actually only requires a single XML file to then pull in all those fields. K2 has a plugin for Josetta, and everything can be handled from the front end. You'll find that if we go to the Josetta Translation Manager, I don't have K2 installed, you will see here items for K2 that can also be translated through the Josetta Translation Manager. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, I think so.
Any other developers that may want to, that are not currently supported, can go to our site, download a sample plugin, and use the XML file basically to point Josetta to the fields that they have in their extension, and then it will show up in here in order for it to be defined. For example, if we take this, in the XML file, they define which fields it is that are translated. We don't show all the fields because we only need to translate particular things, and then people do not need to understand Joomla. They just need to understand what items need to be translated.
Okay, any thoughts when it comes to multilingual sites on using subdomains such as en.joomla.org or fr.joomla.org as opposed to subfolders like joomla.org/en or joomla.org/fr?
I think, depending on how it's configured, if you use subdomains, then you need to have separate installations altogether of Joomla, and you'll need to create all separate sites. I don't know if there's possibly some sort of extension that can avoid doing that. There is some school of thought that thinks it's better to have all separate sites from an SEO perspective, but I think that Google is smarter than that these days, and if you make sure that you publish the language code in your site, then Google will identify those as separate content, even if they're very similar. Does that make sense, Steve? I don't know if you have any additional comments regarding the separate subdomains at all. Separate subdomains for Joomla generally depends separate Joomla installs and managing separate Joomla sites.
I'll leave the person that asked the question to see if they have any follow-ups.
Okay.
Is there anything that you can't translate that you should be aware of?
That you cannot translate. Everything in core is basically translatable. Some things that people run into, and we don't have any templates installed, but some template clubs use template platforms. Those often have the menu built in. And with the T3 platform, for example, you can create separate identities, so you only need to install one copy of the template and then use separate identities to identify which menu you're going to show depending on which language. And for some templates, you need to actually make copies of the templates for each language. One of the things that you have to keep in mind, menus themselves do not have languages. So you actually are never translating menus, you're only translating menu items. The support for multiple languages is generally built into the extensions you add. For core, basically everything is translatable, and for JCal Pro, we have, for example, our calendar. You can have different events in different languages which are controlled by the core multilingual system. And then some other extensions require, like Zoo, for example, does not follow exactly the core languages, but they have Zoolander plugin that adds additional language capability to Zoo. So you really have to talk to the extension developer to see if they support multiple languages or if they don't. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. The person that asked the question is saying they're very, very happy with that answer.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Ron. That was a really good presentation. I learned a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone for attending.